Welcome back, everyone, to the MMA Pick'ems podcast. We're breaking down UFC Fight Night, Walker versus Hill, and I know this one's a little late. I had a pretty busy Super Bowl weekend, on top of the fact we got a last-second change out on the main event. Just didn't really have time to re-record and do all the editing and stuff, so I do apologize for that, but starting next week, everything is going to be back on schedule, I promise. But taking a look at this card, pretty wonky card, honestly. I feel the main event, or the original main event, was what was really carrying this card in terms of just name value and hype potentially. But overall, I do think this card is all right still. We still got some pretty exciting fights and matchups. Some pretty exciting young fighters as well. So overall, not the worst card or anything. And I do think we've got some opportunities here to make a little bit of cash. But like always, I do want to get into the recaps, especially since we do have a pretty big event, and I did have quite a bit of action on the previous card as well. So, this might take a little longer than usual, but it's going to get offset by the fact that we only have, 11 or 12 fights for this card. So let's dive right into it. Kicking off UFC 271, we had William Knight, Maxime Grishin, and Grishin was closing out our parlay from last week, and really not much to say here. It kind of played out the way I expected it to. Grishin just had a ton of success from the outside, and Knight really wasn't able to get much going. I just felt that Grishin pretty much had Knight covered in most areas, and outside of Knight landing that bomb, which he wasn't able to do, I didn't think he'd have much of a chance. But moving along, Jeremiah Wells versus Blood Diamond. Not much to say here. Didn't really have any action on this fight. Wasn't sure how Blood Diamond would look showing up, in his UFC debut. But, I did favor Wells to win. And it definitely looks like Blood Diamond still a little too green in terms of the MMA to be UFC, to cut it in the UFC. But, not sure if he's going to have much of a future at the UFC level. They're going to have to really cherry pick some opponents for him. But moving along, Douglas Silva de Andrade versus Sergey Morozov. And Morozov burned me a little bit here. I'm sure he burned a lot of people. I think a lot of people had Morozov in their parlays, me included. And honestly, I don't think it was a terrible play. I think the early knockdown for Morozov might have kind of shifted the dynamic of the fight a little bit. I don't think Morozov expected to hurt Andrade early, and he might have unloaded his gas tank a little early there and wasn't able to hit any takedowns afterwards, and was pretty much easy pickings after that. So, I feel in most scenarios, he doesn't hurt Andrade, and we see him just pace himself a little better and have a little more success with the grappling come the second and third round. But it is what it is here. A little unfortunate there. Would have been really great if he cashed there, would have had an even bigger winning night. But, sometimes this happens. So we move along. AJ Dobson, Jacob Malkoun. I was on the Malkoun side, but, part of me was concerned that what was happening in the first round of the fight would happen potentially in the second round as well. And we see either Dobson get an early finish or be able to squeak by a 29-28 decision. So ended up not pulling the trigger on Malkoun, but I did take a small shot on Dobson to win in the first round. I like the odds there, and I wasn't convinced entirely of the chin of Malkoun, and I did feel that there might have been like a potential a physicality difference, athleticism difference, and we see Dobson just get Malkoun out of there early. But Malkoun showed pretty good durability. The Haas fight looking like it might have been just a bit of an anomaly. But yeah, that first round, Dobson's takedown defense looked solid, but the pace and the cardio of Malkoun really was what won him the fight here. He was really consistent with going to the takedowns and really just grinding on Dobson. And eventually, Dobson's cardio, I think, just could not keep up with Malkoun, and he wasn't able to do much after that first round. So props on anyone who was on Malkoun. I just did not have it in me to bet Malkoun in that fight. But moving along, Mano Martinez, Ronnie Lawrence, my biggest bet of the night. Ronnie Lawrence came through. Was really hairy in that third round. I honestly did not expect Lawrence to be able to drop Martinez on the feet. Those first two rounds. I thought if anything, we'd see Martinez have a stronger start, but it looked like the opposite happened here, where Martinez was able to catch Lawrence late. And props to the conditioning of Lawrence and his instincts. To be able to not get finished and be able to hit that takedown late to save himself from getting finished that fight, but. I was a little concerned, him, near the end of the fight where, he was starting to posture up a little bit. I was kind of hoping he'd just play it safe, lay in the guard of Martinez, and just grind out the final minute of the fight instead of giving Martinez opportunities to find the submission or even get the fight back to the feet and knock him out. But it all worked out in the end there. I was really fortunate because that was a really big bet, and was able to cash on that. But moving along, that fight got canceled. Carlos Olberg, Fabio Cherant didn't really have any action on this fight. Just thought that Olberg a little too unreliable at this stage in his career to bet him as a huge favorite, but glad to see that he's cashed. He's all around just, I think, the better fighter than Cherant, and it showed this fight. Cherant's just not that good of a fighter, honestly. Moving along, Kyler Phillips, Marcelo Rojo, and I did end up taking a small poke on Phillips by submission here. And credit where credit is due, that was not an original take from me. I believe I heard it on, I think, Clint's podcast, Die Hard MMA. I'm sure you guys have heard of it. It's probably one of the biggest MMA podcasts out here. But anyways, I think he mentioned that Phillips' base was originally, I think, in jiu-jitsu, and then that Rojo had pretty poor submission defense. So I looked into it a bit, and there definitely was some merit there. But something I noticed as well was in a lot of Rojo's fights that he loses inside the distance, it's by submission, and it's late in the fight, second, third round submission losses. So I felt that Rojo was someone that can definitely be broken, especially as the fight progresses and if it hits the ground. So, Rojo is someone who has been pretty tough. So, I feel like the best way to get him out of there is usually just to snatch up a submission. And, Phillips does seem to have pretty legit grappling as well. So, with where the odds were for that, I definitely thought it was worth a little poke there, and took it, and glad it worked out there. Moving along, Roxanne Modafferi, Casey O'Neill. So I ended up taking a small shot on Modafferi to win by decision, because, while I did say that Roxanne usually does not win fights where she isn't able to just completely bully her opponents, I could kind of say the same about O'Neill. Like, she had a pretty significant grappling advantage in her past couple of fights, where, against Dobson and Shevchenko, where she was kind of just able to bully them a little bit and kind of run away with the fight. But, in this matchup here, I don't think she had a very significant grappling advantage. And I do feel that, we could potentially see Modafferi hit some takedowns, work in the clinch a little bit, and, use her physicality a little more in this fight, as opposed to, just keeping it at distance and, just getting pieced up here. But I do feel that had Modafferi, attacked the wrestling and the grappling a little earlier and a little more aggressively, she could have kept it much more competitive. And, at plus like 5-something for Modafferi to win by decision, I thought was, decent value. So I took a small poke on it. Nothing crazy here, because at the end of the day, it was a retirement fight for Modafferi, and she is, slowing down pretty significantly. But yeah, moving along, Andrei Arlovski, Jared Vanderaa. And not a great read here, not a great bet either. It was close-ish, but Arlovski, I think, did win the rounds, I'd say, pretty decisively. It was kind of close, but at the end of the day, it was just a clear levels fight between the two. Arlovski's just the better fighter, and I guess I was just kind of looking for a way to fade the chin and the cardio of Arlovski potentially, but I guess someone like Vanderaa is really not the person to do it. He'd have to fight someone a little better to take advantage of that. So moving along, Bobby Green, Nasrat Haqparast, another bad one here. So, I was on the Haqparast side. And while the read was not good, I feel that the game plan from Haqparast was even worse. I really don't know what the idea was, just going in there, standing in front of Green and just looking to keep the high guard. I don't know if he's looking to potentially just counter Green in there or what, but I thought it was a pretty bad idea. And, there was just zero adjustments either. He just stood in front of Bobby Green for 15 minutes in the high guard and just got pieced up. So, yeah, a pretty bad bet and pretty bad game planning. But moving along, Alexander Hernandez, Renato Moicano took a small poke on Hernandez to win in round one. Because, while I did feel that Moicano is the better fighter all around, and I did pick him to win, I felt that early, we could see Hernandez potentially land a bomb. Hernandez is a pretty crazy athlete in there, and he does have power, combined with the fact that Moicano's chin's a little dodgy in there. And the odds, I took a small poke there. Obviously didn't pan out, but not too upset about it. Good win for Moicano, and it does look like Hernandez does have a bit of a ceiling in this division. He's straight up a bully in there. Like, if he's not able to just run through his opponents early in the fight, he will start to slow down and he will start to fade. And it does look like his confidence starts to drop a bit after that first round when his opponents start to return fire as well. So, Hernandez in a pretty weird spot. He's good enough to just blow these, lower level guys out of the water, but not quite good enough to crack into the top 15. And, I'm not sure if there's too many changes to his game that he could implement that can get him there, but he definitely does have the athletic and physical tools. It's just, I don't know if it's an issue of mentality or just not being quite that skilled, but yeah, he's going to have to figure it out. But moving along, Jared Cannonier, Derek Brunson. My second biggest bet of the night was Jared Cannonier. And oftentimes I have a read for fights, and sometimes it's not really close. Sometimes it plays out similar to how you expect it to. But with this one, it kind of played out to the T. And this usually doesn't happen all that frequently, but I think I nailed it with this one. I did say that Cannonier is going to have the physicality and the power advantage. On top of that, he is the better striker in there. I figured Brunson, he might have a bit of success early in the fight with the wrestling, but, unlike guys like Holland, unlike guys like Till, he's not going to be able to just lay on top of him and grind him out for 3 rounds. Cannonier is someone who's got, decent takedown defense, but more importantly, he fights to get back up. On top of that, Cannonier is just much more physically stronger than guys like Till and Holland. So, you put that all together, you have, Brunson basically exhausting himself, shooting for takedowns, trying to hold down Cannonier and not having a ton of success. So I figured Cannonier would get the knockout in either round 1 or round 2. He's going to work his way back up to his feet. Brunson's going to be, way too gassed to continuously, have success taking Cannonier down. And on top of that, Brunson, he was in some trouble against, guys like Till and Holland, for the short amount of time he was on the feet. So I felt that it was only a matter of time before Cannonier was able to knock Brunson out. So, was able to cash on that second round knockout bet. Brutal knockout, though. Just seeing Brunson take 2 or 3 unanswered elbows to the head and seeing his head just bounce off the canvas was a little unsettling. Hopefully the UFC gives him a bit of a softball matchup for his retirement fight, but I kind of doubt the UFC is going to do that. Anyways, we move along. Derek Lewis, Tai Tuivasa. I think I took a small poke on Derek Lewis by decision, and it was at around like plus 850 or something, so I just put like a small 0.1 unit shot on it. Just figured that if the fight somehow went to a decision, if that somehow crept over, nobody got finished, that Lewis would probably win the decision there. Lewis has historically actually been pretty good in decisions, and I thought after that first round, we could potentially see this fight drag on, but Tai Tuivasa showing a tremendous chin in there. He took so many heavy shots from Lewis, and honestly, anyone else would have been knocked out 2 or 3 times in that fight, but just crazy chin on Tuivasa's part. And crazy knockout on his end as well. I mean, just seeing Lewis faceplant like that was pretty crazy. I don't think Lewis has ever been knocked out like that. I mean, I think a lot of Lewis's knockouts are just TKO stoppages where, he's kind of just looking for a way out, or, his opponent's got him mounted and they're able to finish him that way. But this was a straight up just out cold knockout. So crazy stuff there. But moving along, Israel Adesanya, Robert Whittaker. I did have the over 1.5 parlayed in this one. I thought that it would be a pretty close fight. Figured it would actually go to a decision, but I did think that, potentially we see Adesanya find a knockout maybe in the 3rd or 4th rounds, depending on, how aggressive Rob is and what kind of reads Adesanya's making in there. But, it did creep to the over, but I just played it super safe with the 1.5. Thought that there'd be a little more of a feeling out process after what happened last time, especially on Whittaker's end. So I thought that was pretty safe to cash, and was a little concerned earlier. I thought Adesanya might have gotten the knockdown, but it looked like he just punched Whittaker in the chest and had him off balance. But that cashed pretty easily. The outcome of the fight was pretty close, like I expected it to be. Adesanya does fight close to indecisions. Honestly, this was a fight where I thought that Adesanya took 1 pretty clearly, and then Whittaker took round 5 pretty clearly. 2 and 4 were a bit of toss-ups. I know a lot of people had it for Rob, potentially, but while I thought it was close in those rounds, Rob had some of the bigger moments, but I felt Izzy was working a little more, and he was touching Rob up. So it's a pretty tough fight to score, honestly. I can't be upset about it going either way, because it was really close in a couple of those rounds. But here's my tinfoil hat theory on some of these fights, actually. I do feel that when it comes to certain fighters that are at a certain level of stardom, guys like Izzy, I do think that they get a bit of favoritism when it comes to some of the scoring. Because Izzy, I think, is one of the few guys in the UFC who could consistently do like 500K plus buys on pay-per-views. I think some of the only other fighters who could do that are, probably Usman at this point. Maybe John Jones. It's kind of hard to say. It's been a while since he's fought. Maybe Ngannou, but it looks like the UFC's kind of beefing with them a little bit. And Conor McGregor, of course. But outside of that, I don't know if they have too many stars that could pull these numbers. So I feel maybe there's a little financial incentive to keep Adesanya as champ. But regardless, it's just my thoughts on it. And this wasn't even like a super egregious case of it, if at all. I mean, outside of that one judge that scored it, like 49-46. Personally, I do think I edged it towards Izzy in this fight. Would not have been upset if Whitaker won either. But overall, pretty solid card. Pretty solid event for me. Hope to keep this rolling. But before we get into the breakdowns for this card, I do want to shout out everyone who's been supporting the channel so far, everyone who's been liking, people who've been subscribing. I know the channel hasn't really grown too much lately. I've done fuck all in terms of promotion and plugs, and the results honestly have been pretty mediocre. But I do appreciate everyone who's been coming back and watching these videos. Everyone who's shown support so far, that has not gone unnoticed. I really do appreciate it. I'm going to keep grinding here, and I hope you guys enjoy the content. Kicking off the card, we have Khalid Taha versus Mario Bautista. And Bautista's the minus 130 favorite. Comeback on Taha is plus 110. And this should be a pretty fun fight to kick off the card. We have two strikers going at it, two very dynamic strikers. Very exciting young prospects also. I guess. I mean, Taha's kind of been on a pretty rough go of it, and Bautista is coming off of a knockout, but regardless, I do think these guys have a bit of a future in the UFC. But anyways, we'll start with Taha. Like I said, primarily a boxer in there. His boxing is honestly pretty slick. He seems to have decent power as well. I mean, the guy's got a quick knockout over Boston Salmon and was able to drop Bruno Silva early. So I do think he's one of the heavier hitters. At 135, the thing is, a lot of guys have been able to wrestle him and take him down and really mitigate the striking of Taha. But this is a fight where I do think that Bautista is going to give Taha the fight he wants, and that's going to be a stand-up affair. But we'll move on to Bautista, who, he's a bit more of a volume striker. He's pretty light on his feet. I think he's someone who is, pretty aggressive, and he is someone who likes to pressure as well. It does look like the volume and pace and pressure is able to go for all three rounds. So he is someone who, I like to just consistently work in there. He's got good offensive striking, does a good job of mixing up his attacks. He's got, good footwork, good feints in there as well. Just someone who is just constantly working overall. I mean, the guy's got a pretty sneaky knee, sneaky leg kicks as well. The cardio seems solid. However, the defensive tendencies, not so much. He is pretty hittable in there. And that's kind of expected with these guys who do push a pace, right? They're a bit more offensively minded. Their defense is usually a little lacking. And Bautista definitely paid the price in his last fight against Giles, where, he kept his hands low and, was getting a little reckless in the pocket. Giles was able to, or Jones, actually, Trevin Jones, not Giles, my bad, was able to find the mark and put him out. So, Bautista's in a pretty weird spot. I thought that his durability was actually solid going into that fight. He'd eaten some pretty heavy shots from Sandhagen. He took a couple knees from Sandhagen and I think Jinsu's son as well. So I thought his durability would check out, but Jones was able to land a pretty clean one and put him out. So not sure how it's going to hold up coming into this fight, because I do think Taha's a pretty heavy hitter. This is an interesting matchup overall, honestly. We have power versus volume essentially in this matchup when it comes to the striking. So it's kind of tough to really pick a side here, because it'll really depend on what the judges are going to favor. Before tape, I was kind of leaning the Bautista side. I really liked that. I really liked the output, honestly, and I thought that maybe outside of the first round, Taha was not going to have too much success, but when I looked into it a little further, I think it is actually a pretty even matchup. Taha, I think, is probably going to win round 1. We see Bautista potentially win round 3. The second round's going to be kind of close. It'll depend on, how much Taha's going to be slowing down, but it's kind of hard to say because Taha's really only fought grapplers in there, right? They're able to push a pretty decent grappling pace, and we see Taha just slow down and eventually just get grinded out. But this is one where I think we see just a striking affair. And with Bautista, something I did notice when he's up against some of these heavier hitters, kind of like Johns, kind of like Jones, his volume tends to get suppressed a little bit. He's not able to throw as many strikes as he has, against a Son who is not as heavy of a hitter and someone who is kind of hittable himself. But I do feel Taha is a bit more defensively sound than some of those guys. So I do think that, maybe we don't see Bautista land as much volume as he did in some of his previous fights. On top of that, I kind of do favor Taha to potentially get the knockout early. I don't think it's a super high likelihood, but I do think that it can happen because I do think Taha's got some power, and Bautista is a little lackadaisical with his defense, so we could see Taha catch Bautista early, but I don't think that's super likely. I think we see Taha win round one, just based off of landing some of the harder shots. Might be able to rock Bautista. And then the second round, we see Taha maybe have a bit of success early in that second round, fade a bit as that round progresses, and we start to see Bautista take over towards the end of the second and likely the third. So tough fight to call in that regards, but I think I'm going to lean with Taha here. I think he's got a little finishing potential early, and I do think that maybe some of the power striking he has will look a little better to the judges, because lately we have seen some of the heavier hitters win on the cards, but it's not like Bautista's got no chance here. I do think that Bautista's a very solid striker himself who does push at a pretty crazy pace, and we could see him run away with the second and third round for that reason. So tough fight to call, but I'm going to go with Taha here. Not sure if I'll have a play on this fight because I do feel that it's a pretty even fight, and it's more or less a pick 'em on each side, so I don't see a ton of value on either side. But the pick for me in this fight is going to be Taha. And really quickly, I do want to add, I think Taha's actually shown a slightly more well-rounded game as well. Outside of the striking, I have seen Taha, look to grapple a little bit, and we have seen a bit of a submission game from him also. So I do think that he's maybe slightly more well-rounded, but I'm not sure if that's going to play too much of a factor. I think it's going to be a stand-up affair, but should this fight hit the ground, maybe Taha has a little advantage, but it's hard to say. Regardless, the pick for me is Taha in this fight. And in the next fight, we have Christian Rodriguez versus Jonathan Pearce. Pearce is the minus 380 favorite. Comeback on Rodriguez is plus 315. And Rodriguez is going to be coming in short notice this fight, filling in for Austin Lingo. And, this is going to be a pretty tough fight to come in on in short notice, stylistically, at least, because, Rodriguez, from what I have seen, looks like he's going to want to look to stand and strike in there. But, I don't know if Rodriguez is like a very big puncher. He's got decent, counter punching, does seem to have pretty slick boxing overall, but I don't know if he's going to be able to shut down the takedowns of Pearce, because, Rodriguez, on his Contender Series fight, was taken down a couple of times and was controlled by Reyes Cortez, and I really don't think Reyes Cortez is some phenomenal wrestler or grappler either. And even in that fight, he did a good job of, defending takedowns overall, but, he still gave up some control time, I believe in the first and the third round. But regardless, I don't think that Cortez is really on the level of, wrestling and grappling as someone like Pearce. Pearce is someone who will look to chain takedowns together, is very smothering with his grappling. He's pretty aggressive with his submission attempts as well, and just very aggressive overall, with his grappling. He's someone who has, really good cardio. He can push a pretty crazy pace in there and really just, break his opponents with the grappling pace that he puts on them. So I do feel this is a very tough fight for Rodriguez to be making his short notice debut in. And, outside of Rodriguez just being able to catch Pearce early with like a bomb or something, I don't know if he's got too much of a chance in this fight. So I really like Pearce here. I think to beat someone like Pearce, you need to have one of the following. One, just be a very explosive power puncher, be able to catch, Pearce coming in, because, Pearce does have some pretty bad defensive tendencies on the feet. So, if you're really good offensive striking, with very explosive striking, you could potentially catch him. or be the superior grappler, right? Because this fight's going to hit the ground. And if you're able to just out-scramble him, get on top, sweep him, potentially catch him in like a transition or even in like a submission or something, he could win that way, which, Pearce has been submitted a few times before. So that could potentially be a path to victory against Pearce. And lastly, it could just be someone who's got, good cardio as well, good takedown defense, and better striking, just keep it standing and just outstrike him, which, of all the things here, I don't know if Rodriguez really fits the bill for any of them. Maybe he's the last one that I talked about here. Maybe Rodriguez will have good enough cardio to keep this fight standing and just outbox JSP here, but I don't know if Rodriguez is that type of fighter. I mean, he showed flashes of it in the Cortez fight, but I don't know if that's enough to buy in. So I'm going to pick JSP here. I think he's going to be able to put the pace on Rodriguez. I think he gets maybe a round 2 or round 3 finish. Rodriguez coming in short notice is not going to help him either. So maybe the cardio is not quite on point. And if it's not, I do see Pearce just being able to put on a crazy pace and finding the round 2 or round 3 finish. So give me Jonathan Pearce here. And moving into the next fight, we have Jesse Strader versus Chad Anheliger. And Anheliger's the minus 260 favorite. Comeback on Strader is plus 220. And pretty interesting fight here. We'll start with Strader, who does seem to be a pretty aggressive striker. He's someone who will move forward and just throw heat. He likes to slam those leg kicks. Really likes to rip to the body as well. He loads up pretty big on a lot of his shots. It does look like he's got a bit of power also. On the other hand, though, he is a bit hittable, and he is someone who's willing to exchange in the pocket. And overall, I do find his durability a little sketchy, especially with the way he fights. He's 5-2 with both of his losses being by knockout. So, a little concerning there. Granted, both of those knockouts are against UFC level opponents. Kinda. I mean, Jackson, I think, is UFC level, whereas with Rojo, he might be a bit more borderline. It's kind of hard to say. He's got a fight with Phillips coming up, so we'll see how he performs there. But overall, I do think Rojo's a pretty solid, like, regional level talent. So, he's getting knocked out by, decent fighters. But on the other hand, his wins aren't all that impressive. That said, though, I do think that Strader's got a bit of finishing upside, offensively speaking. That said, though, his game's somewhat limited. But taking a look at his opponent, Anheliger, he seems like a pretty well-rounded fighter, someone who's kind of can do a bit of everything. His striking is pretty solid. I've seen him look to grapple as well. His cardio seems to check out. He's fought a number of fights that have gone the distance. He's got a lot of finishes as well. So I do think overall he's a really just well-rounded, solid regional fighter. Honestly, I think the best comp I can kind of think of just off the top of my head is kind of like Victor Henry, but maybe not as skilled. But, just Victor Henry light, I guess. He's an older regional fighter who's got a well-rounded skill set, who's just pretty solid overall. But the thing is, with Anheliger, he is getting a little older. I know he's 35 at bantamweight. Not a ton of wear and tear in terms of just the amount of fights he's had, so probably not a super big issue here, just something that I did want to point out. And he has been somewhat active as well, so, he hasn't shown like a ton of regression. So overall, I do think that Anheliger is probably the better fighter, the more well-rounded fighter, a little more technical as well. That said, though, I just don't see how this line should be that wide. I definitely think that Strader could give Anheliger some problems early. I think, with the heat that Strader throws, he might even be able to get Anheliger out of there. That said, though, Anheliger's, he might be able to go to his wrestling. He might be able to just weather that early storm and just take over. And, he might even just be able to catch Strader early because Strader's really content to just exchange in the pocket and just brawl, basically. So, maybe Anheliger could put Strader out. Maybe Anheliger could go to his wrestling to kind of neutralize some of that power. But, at the end of the day, I don't think Anheliger's fought like the highest level guys either. He's got a number of losses on the regionals as well. So at the end of the day, I do think this is a somewhat close fight. So, I'm going to go with Anheliger to win, but I might put a bet on Strader here because I do think that if it stays standing, it'll probably be a pretty competitive fight, and I do think that there's a chance that Strader's able to get the finish early. I mean, Strader's a very aggressive and very, very big hitter, so pick for me is Anheliger. I think that he could potentially get the decision win, maybe even get the finish if Strader is over aggressive early. But overall, I do think it's probably going to be pretty close, and I do think that Strader's got a decent chance of pulling off the upset here. So pick is Anheliger, but I might just take like a small half unit shot on Strader here actually. And in the next fight, we have Gloria de Paula versus Diana Belbiţă, and this is a pick'em, minus 110 both ways. And, this should be a pretty fun fight, and I'm not even being sarcastic. Both of these fighters do like to move forward, both like to strike, so this should be a pretty fun back and forth striking affair. But we'll start with de Paula first, who, honestly, I don't have the best read on. She does seem to be a decent Muay Thai striker. She's got some power, seems to be a decent athlete, but, the footage is somewhat limited, and pretty low level competition that she's been up against. She kind of ran through her Dana White Contender Series opponent, but since then has had 2 just dud fights in the UFC. She gets stuck on her back, for 2 rounds against Jinyu Fry. Fry was able to take her down in rounds 1 and 3 and basically just hold her there. Round 2, she was pretty competitive on the feet. I think de Paula did win the second round, but her takedown defense is pretty bad, and her get-up game was pretty bad as well. And then in her next fight, her most recent fight, de Paula basically just gets head kicked by Cheyenne Flismus within the first minute as she's trying to stand up. So, not the best read on de Paula. All I know is she seems to be a decent offensive striker with a bit of power, but overall does seem like a somewhat unreliable fighter. And I think Belbiţă's kind of similar for me. She's a decent offensive striker, and like de Paula, she's got pretty much no ground game. Her takedown defense is pretty bad, and she can get stuck off her back. Her defensive grappling, her submission defense seems pretty questionable as well. Same with the fight IQ. And I remember the Joshua fight where Belbiţă, she had a pretty clear advantage on the feet, but ended up clinching up with Joshua. The fight hit the ground, and then she gets armbarred there. So fight IQ is, I think, a little suspect, but we did see what happens when Belbiţă gets the fight that she wants, the kickboxing affair. Basically, against Goldie in her most recent fight, she just was able to piece up Goldie for 3 rounds. So I think that, in this fight, both fighters are going to get the fight that they want. They're going to get a striking affair. Both are going to look to stand and bang in there. So for that reason, I do think it's a pretty close fight. I think the line is lined pretty accurately. I give Belbiţă. I give Belbiţă the advantage at distance. She's going to have some slight physical advantages, like the height and the reach. She's got good straight punches. I think the distance striking is going to favor Belbiţă a little bit more. I think de Paula is maybe the better kicker. I think she's a little stronger in the clinch. She's got slightly better clinch striking. De Paula might be the more physical striker as well. But as far as like the grappling goes, I think it's a bit of a wash. Both have pretty terrible defensive grappling. I have seen Belbiţă, go for takedowns once in a while. So if there's any grappling upside, it might be with Belbiţă. And seeing how lost de Paula looked off her back, that might be something that Belbiţă might look to attack. But for the most part, I do think this plays out on the feet. And when that happens, I do think it's going to be pretty back and forth and pretty close. As far as the experience goes, I thought that Belbiţă would have the experience advantage. And, I do think she slightly edges it. But if you look at the record of Belbiţă a little more closely, you'll see that her record's honestly pretty padded. She's got some losses to some decent fighters, or at least, fighters who you've kind of heard of. But the wins are really nothing to write home about. A lot of the wins are over debuting fighters or 0-1 or 0-2 fighters. So, she's technically got more fights in there, but it's against very low-level opponents. So the record of Belbiţă definitely a bit padded, but overall, I would still slightly edge her in the experience, because I think she's lost to better opponents than to de Paula. So I do think it's overall a pretty close fight, but if I did have to lean on a side, I would go with Belbiţă here. I think, she's, again, slight experience advantage, slight size advantage, I guess. And then I do like her to potentially have a bit of, grappling upside as well. So the lean is Belbiţă on here, but, it's a very low confidence. I think it's a very 50-50 fight. And in the next fight, we have Skelly versus Striegl. And Skelly's going to be the minus 220 favorite. Come back on Striegl is plus 185. And this should be a pretty interesting fight between two grapplers. Both guys very effective there on the ground. So it'll be interesting to see whose grappling is going to come out ahead. But we'll start with Striegl first. So, like I said before, the guy's primarily a grappler. He'll look to get in on his opponent's hips, take him down, and really look to control them there. He's got a pretty aggressive submission game, but he also does seem to look to consolidate control first. So he's not someone who's going to get overly reckless, just hunting for the sub, worrying about the sub over position here. The guy does seem pretty positionally sound on top. He's a very strong, very physical guy as well. The striking is, pretty meat and potatoes with Striegl. He's it is serviceable, honestly, on the feet. I think his chin is maybe a little suspect. Even before his knockout loss to Saeed Nurmagomedov, he, I believe, was getting hurt on the regionals. In his most recent fight before his UFC debut, against Shimizu, I think it looked like Shimizu might have had him wobbled a little bit before he was able to take him down. So, I don't know. I think the chin of Striegl might be a little suspect, but I don't know if it'll be too big of an issue here because Skelly's not exactly a big puncher. Skelly is someone who does thrive when he's on the ground as well. He's very crafty there with his submissions. He's also very slippery in scrambles as well. The guy actually pushes a pretty crazy pace on the mat. So Skelly, I think, is someone who's a very sneaky, very dangerous submission grappler. That said, though, Skelly's not very positionally sound when it comes to his grappling. Sometimes he'll get a little over aggressive with the submission attempts. He'll lose position. And, Skelly is someone who's got pretty bad takedown defense. He's content to kind of just play off his back as well. He's quite aggressive there, but, if he isn't able to find the submission, he will give up a lot of minutes and, he will give up a lot of control time as well. So, Skelly, while he is dangerous, this is going to be a pretty tricky matchup for him, especially if he does decide to play off his back for extended periods as well. So, this is a pretty interesting matchup. I think both guys should be pretty evenly matched, honestly. I do favor the experience and the level of competition that Skelly's had, obviously. Striegl's primarily just been a really solid regional fighter. He's only had one fight in the UFC, whereas Skelly's had like a good chunk of his career be in the UFC. That said, though, Skelly's kind of fought like just lower level guys at the UFC level. So, regardless, I do still favor the experience that UFC or the UFC experience of Skelly much more than the regional experience of Striegl overall. But stylistically, I do think they match up pretty well. It's honestly, I think who's going to be able to get into a dominant position first. And I'm kind of leaning Striegl, actually, because Striegl, he's going to be the much more physical fighter in this matchup. He's going to be a little stockier too. So I think if he's able to get in on the hips of Skelly, he's probably going to be able to take him down and just kind of lay on top of him, because Skelly is someone who will attack submissions off his back. He is very aggressive there, but Striegl is going to be, I think, the much stronger grappler. So I think if Striegl is able to get on top of Skelly and, remain positionally sound, defensively sound, I do think that he could probably just kind of ride Skelly out for 3 rounds. But, if Skelly is able to get his, offensive grappling going, we could see him have a lot of success there and maybe even submit Striegl as well. But I do think this is going to be a pretty close, back and forth sort of grappling fight. But honestly, I kind of lean more towards the guy who's, much stronger and more physical in Striegl, I think. And, I do think there are a couple red flags on the Skelly side as well. He's super inactive, hasn't fought in over 2 years now. And, he has said before the weight cut's getting a little tough for him. It's very, very hard for him to cut down to 145. And, him at 36, I think the weight cut's going to get even harder for him. But, that actually makes me, I actually just thought of something here. I think Striegl's actually going to be moving up to 145. So he might not actually have as much of a power advantage as I had thought initially. But regardless, Striegl, from what I've seen on tape, the guy's absolutely just jacked up. So who knows how he's going to look at 145. Maybe he'll have a slightly better cardio. But in any case, I do think that Striegl, You know what? I don't know, actually. I think the power and the strength might be pretty even now that I'm thinking about it. But regardless, I think that Striegl might still be the stronger guy. But honestly, this weight thing is kind of throwing a wrench in my Striegl angle. But in any case, outside of Skelly's, experience advantage, I do think they match up pretty well stylistically. And, the layoff and the weight cut for Skelly, I think is... it might be a bit of an issue coming into this fight. So I'm going to take a small shot on Striegl here. I mean, at the end of the day, the guy's a pretty big underdog, so I don't think I need too much justification here. But I do think that Striegl can pull it off with his wrestling, with his grappling. So give me Striegl to win via decision here. And moving along, we have Jessica Rose Clark versus Stephanie Egger. And Clark is going to be the minus 190 favorite. Comeback on Egger is plus 165. And I think this fight is somewhat straightforward to break down. Both fighters are pretty similar, honestly. They bring a lot of the same skill sets to the table. I think, frame-wise, they're both pretty similar. Their striking, I think, is somewhat serviceable. Nothing crazy. I don't think either one's really going to be winning too many striking affairs, but I would consider both of them wrestler grapplers. Both of them have had the most success when they're able to get the fights to the ground, and they're generally reliable to go there. But, they will struggle a bit when they're forced to stand and trade. The big difference between the two, I think, is just going to be the experience for Jessica Rose Clark. She's had a lot more UFC fights. I think she's fought better competition in there. But that said, it's not by a very wide margin by any means. You look at some of the fighters that Clark's beaten, it's really nothing to write home about. But, you look at the fighters that Egger's beaten, and it's, similar level, probably even, weaker. So overall experience, I do give to Clark, but... not by a crazy wide margin or anything. But as far as how this fight's going to play out, I think it's, pretty 50-50 on the feet. I don't think either fighter's particularly, good in the striking department. I think we see some pretty even exchanges. The grappling is where it gets interesting here. So I think that whoever's able to really to shoot first and get a dominant position first is going to be the one to likely steal the rounds. Both of them have shown that they can have success with offensive takedowns, get control time. But overall, I'm slightly leaning the Rose Clark side. Egger has not looked particularly good when she's on her back. We saw Cortez basically just ragdoll Egger, was able to lay on top of her, take her back, and control her for nearly 15 minutes. And Cortez, to her credit, is a pretty solid wrestler, but at the end of the day, Cortez is a 125er, and she was basically able to just dominate Egger for 15 minutes. So, I don't know if Rose Clark is going to have similar success here, but seeing a 125er and Cortez just ragdoll Egger was just not a great look. And, one thing I did notice was that, Cortez had a lot of success hitting the same trip takedown over and over on Egger and just getting a lot of control time off of that. And something I saw with Clark in her most recent fight against Edwards was she did have a really nice trip takedown as well. And she was able to basically lay and pray her way to a pretty dominant decision over Edwards. So I think that Rose Clark, probably can have a bit of success doing the same thing, just hitting some takedowns on Egger and potentially just grinding her out to a very boring decision like she did in her most recent fight against Edwards. That said, though, I don't know if I could really trust Clark to pull off that game plan. She very well could, but, I could kind of see this fight playing out on the feet for extended periods because neither fighter's really good in the stand-up department. So, sometimes when that happens, you see both fighters get sucked into just a stand-up affair. And what I mean by that is sometimes when fighters are pretty similarly matched on the feet, both of them are probably going to think they're winning these exchanges, and so they're content to just stand and trade, when really it's a very 50-50 fight, and the judges are able to score it either way. So I think sometimes that happens, but the smart thing for Rose Clark to do, I think, is just to aggressively go for the takedowns and hopefully get enough top control time to win a decision here. But as far as the pick goes, I'm going to go with Clark here. I do think that she's got a very clear path to victory in the wrestling, but I do think Egger may just be the value side because, again, if this is a stand-up affair, it could be, very 50-50, and, Egger could potentially hit her own takedowns as well, but I think that's a little less likely than Clark hitting takedowns because Clark does have decent takedown defense, and Egger overall just does not seem to have as strong of a wrestling game as Clark. So the pick for me in this fight is going to be Jessica Rose Clark. I think she gets it done by a decision. I think she grinds out a pretty boring decision here. So give me Jessica Rose Clark. And moving along, we have David Onama versus Gabriel Benítez. And Onama's the minus 165 favorite. Come back on Benítez is plus 145. And this should be a pretty exciting fight. Personally, I'm actually pretty excited to see Onama in his second UFC fight after the fight that he put on in his UFC debut. But Onama does look like a pretty exciting young prospect, completely exceeded a lot of people's expectations in his debut against Jones. Put on an absolute banger of a fight on short notice as well against Jones, who is, a pretty solid prospect himself. So, I do think that Onama's got a pretty high ceiling, but as far as what he brings to the table, he does look like he's got some pretty heavy hands. He's got a lot of wins inside the distance on the regionals. That was definitely a red flag coming into his fight against Jones. It looked like he might have been just a somewhat one-dimensional fighter, but it does look like he's got a pretty decent skill set overall. Because, his striking is solid. He's got pretty good counter-punching as well. The takedown defense is a little suspect, but he has shown that he's very hard to hold down, very slippery on the ground. He will consistently look to work his way back up, and the cardio seems to check out as well, because he does have a lot of early finishes, but he does have, I think, a finish in the third round as well. And then his most recent fight, it was on short notice. He was able to push a pretty crazy pace against Jones. Jones was taking him down in every round, but he was working his way back up. He was still throwing, so I do think the cardio of Onama checks out. So it doesn't look like he's just one of these heavy hitters with no cardio. And I don't want to completely jump the gun here, but it looks like he might just be a freak athlete who's got a pretty well-rounded skill set at this point. So overall, I do think he's a solid prospect who could definitely make some waves in the division. But this is a big step up in competition, and at the end of the day, I don't want to overrate the performance that Onama had in his fight against Jones, because that's kind of what I did with Jones when he stepped in on short notice against, I believe, Mike Davis. He put up a hell of a fight in that matchup. Kind of led me to overrate him a little bit going into this fight, and then Onama puts on a great fight here. So I don't want to make the same mistake, because I remember putting Jones in a pretty big parlay against Onama, and that fight ended up being much hairier than expected. And this could be a situation here for Onama, because he is going up against Benítez, who I think is a pretty proven striker, a very seasoned UFC fighter. The guy's gotten a number of UFC fights, and has shown that he can hang at the UFC level. As far as what he brings to the table, Benítez, again, is a very solid striker, very heavy leg kicks, which, everybody loves to talk about. His takedown defense, his defensive grappling in general, I think, is a little suspect, but I don't know if it'll be too much of an issue here, because Onama, from what I have seen, is primarily a striker as well. But the thing I do want to note with Benítez is I do think he is declining a little bit. He has historically, I think, just been a bit of a gatekeeper as well. So I do think he's a declining gatekeeper at that. And, at 33, I don't think he's super old or anything, but he does have a decent amount of wear and tear for his age. And, he has been dropped and he has been hurt a number of times. On top of that, I do think the weight cut might be getting to him a little bit as well. He's tried to fight at 155, hasn't had much success there. He's back at 145, and, honestly has not looked great. And I do feel that Onama is going to be a pretty tough matchup for Benítez, all things considered. I think the power could be an issue for Benítez. Benítez has been hurt. He has been dropped and knocked out before. I think that Benítez kind of struggles a bit with, good counterpunchers, and Onama is a little unproven, but I do think he's got decent counterpunching. Benítez does throw a lot of naked leg kicks. They hurt his opponents, but, he doesn't do a great job of setting them up. And, if Onama is able to get the timing down, I do think he could potentially find the chin of Benítez. Benítez did get knocked out by Sodiq Yusuff, who landed a nice counter on him. And, even Billy Q was able to land a nice overhand on Benítez as well. So I think that, on the feet, we could potentially see Benítez get knocked out here. But again, this is a big step up in competition for Onama. Benítez is by far going to be the best striker that Onama's gone up against. Even though, stylistically, this could give Benítez some troubles. This is a potentially a big skill gap. But on the flip side of things, Onama is going to be the much younger fighter, a bit quicker, and I do think he's going to have the durability advantage as well. And we haven't really seen too much from Onama either. We don't know if he's got any sort of offensive grappling. I mean, we haven't really seen much from it, and he's a very young fighter, so he could be making improvements as well. But I do have to favor Onama in this fight. I really liked what I saw from him in that first fight. I do think he's got some stylistic advantages as well. I think that Benítez, despite being a solid gatekeeper level fighter, he is declining as well. And I think we've kind of seen the ceiling of Benítez, honestly. I don't think he's getting any better. Whereas with Onama, I do think he's got a bit more potential and a bit more upside. I think he can make some waves in the UFC. Big step up, though, so I don't know if I want to take Onama, minus 160 or really at minus odds against a proven veteran in Benítez. But I do think that Onama could be the real deal here. So I don't want to get in front of him for this matchup. But official pick for me is going to be David Onama. I think he gets it done by round 1 knockout. And in the next fight, we have Joaquin Buckley versus Abdul Razak Alhassan. And Buckley's going to be the minus 150 favorite. Come back on. Alhassan is plus 130. And this is a fight that was rebooked. I don't think my opinions changed too much on it. I don't think the lines changed too much either, but here's what I think about it again. So Buckley, very fun striker to watch, honestly. The guy's, got great combination punching. The guy's really likes to just explode into his punches. Seems to have, decent cardio as well. It looks like he is able to push a pretty decent striking pace. We haven't seen him completely go to decision too much, but I do think his power kind of carries, and with the output that he throws and with the power that he throws, I do think that he's got, decent cardio, all things considered. I like how he rips to the body. I like how he puts combinations together. The defensive grappling does not look particularly great, from the Storley fight, but that said, I do think Storley's a decent wrestler, and Alhassan is probably just going to look to stand and strike with him, so I don't think it'll be a big factor here. But what Alhassan does bring to the table is big power, very big power. And this is going to be a fight where I think Alhassan's going to get the fight that he wants. In his last few matchups, he was being taken down and kind of just being grinded out. He did get the early finish against DeCarico, but, that was a head kick finish. I suspect that if we saw the fight get extended, we see a much different outcome. I think we see DeCarico maybe get his grappling and wrestling going in that fight, and we see a much, much different outcome. But what happened, and, Alhassan is coming off of a very nice head kick win, so he's got that going for him. And, he's going to be going up against Buckley, who, he's shown a little bit of wrestling, but isn't someone who consistently goes to it. And, Buckley is generally someone who will look to stand and bang in there with him, so Alhassan is definitely going to get what he wants in there, but, Buckley, I think, is a pretty decent striker himself. I kind of favor Buckley to be the minute winner here. Buckley does have pretty decent output, and he is pretty aggressive in there, so I do expect him to be winning most of the minutes, honestly, but Alhassan, of course, does have that knockout power, and, he could potentially have big enough shots to swing rounds, but, I do think Buckley's a pretty explosive striker himself, so I don't know if the damage that Alhassan's going to be able to put out is enough to swing rounds in his favor, unless he seriously hurts Buckley, which could happen, right? Buckley's been knocked out a couple times already, and Alhassan is a very big puncher. So overall, this is honestly a pretty dodgy fight for me. I'm kind of leaning the Buckley side just because I do think that the volume and the output could give Alhassan some troubles, but on the other hand, Alhassan is a very potent striker himself, and he could potentially put Buckley out. I think that's a very live outcome. But I think I'm still going to stick to the Buckley side here. I think the speed might be a bit of a factor. Alhassan is getting a little older. The guy still has very dangerous power, of course, but I do expect Buckley to be winning a lot of the minutes. And I do think Buckley's got a little bit of wrestling upside. We have seen him hit offensive takedowns before, and Alhassan just has not shown really good takedown defense or a get-up game. I mean, we saw that in the Malkoun fight and the Lazez fight, and I guess you could kind of give him a pass on the Malkoun fight because, as it turns out, Malkoun's just a very smothering sort of grappler who can push a pretty crazy pace. But even in the Lazez fight, he was taken down by Lazez, who's a striker who honestly is kind of green himself. So if Lazzez was able to continuously just hit takedowns on Alhassan and lay on top of him, I think that Buckley could potentially do that as well, even though Buckley's not a phenomenal wrestler or anything. So I'm going to go with Buckley here. I think he wins. I think he wins a decision. And in the next fight, we have Jim Miller versus Nikolas Motta. And this is a fight that's been rebooked. I think they were initially scheduled to fight a few months ago, but it seems like they're really, or the UFC is really bent on trying to get this matchup. And it kind of feels like the UFC is trying to give Motta the push here because unlike Miller's last opponent in Eric Gonzalez, I do think that Motta's a bit more dangerous of a prospect. So not really sure what the intentions of the UFC are here but should be a pretty exciting fight because Motta is a very aggressive striker, at least from what I've seen. He does a really good job of pumping the jab out. He's got good counter striking, and I think most importantly, he's got very heavy hands. On the regionals, he's just knocking guys out left and right. And then even on the Contender Series, he broke the guy's nose pretty handily. So far has looked pretty good. Of course, you got to worry about the level of competition. These guys who, are coming in, making their UFC debut with nothing but just a lot of early finishes against low-level guys in the regionals. You got to be a little wary of these guys. But, from everything I've seen from Motta, he does look like a pretty solid prospect. Haven't seen too much from his defensive grappling, but it looks like he did beat Skelly back in the day. Skelly is a very high-level submission grappler. So he's gotten a little experience in terms of, being matched up with a very strong, submission guys. And, that's definitely going to come into play here, especially since he's going up against Miller, who is a longtime UFC vet. But lately, Miller is someone who is pretty much early finish or bust, particularly round 1 submission or bust. I know he got the knockout in round 2, his last fight, but historically, Miller is someone who is going to look for the submission early in the fight and will fade as the fight goes on. Kind of a bummer he got the second round finish because I remember taking Miller in round 1 and gets the finish in the first 10 seconds of like the second round. But regardless, Eric Gonzalez, not really UFC caliber, someone who was, I think, coming in short notice, someone who just not a great fighter in general. Miller didn't even have to go to the grappling. He was able to knock him out. So not a fight I want to take too much from, but going into this matchup, I do expect Miller to maybe look to implement the grappling early because Motta is someone who is probably going to be the heavier hitter. I think Motta's a better striker than Gonzalez, Miller's previous opponent, and I do think that Motta can crack. So in extended striking exchanges, I could see him potentially hurting Miller. So I can see Miller just looking to go to the wrestling and the grappling early, and he could potentially catch Motta, but with any Jim Miller fight, I do think that if the fight gets extended, he's going to be in a bit of trouble, come the second and third round. Because, you look at all of Miller's recent fights, and, anytime he gets extended beyond that first round, he will slow down pretty significantly. In the Joe Skelly fight, he did that. In the Pichel fight, he did that. And even in the Holtzman fight, he did that. He has a pretty solid first round, but afterwards, he falls off pretty significantly. It's, I think, just a combination of the age and the Lyme disease. So, I like Miller to potentially get the finish early. He's going to be going up against a pretty green fighter in Motta, but, if he doesn't get that early finish, I could see Motta starting to take over in the second and third round with the striking. I see him potentially hurting Miller, maybe getting the finish. Miller's been pretty damn tough, but, Motta's a young, hungry prospect who's looking to make a splash in the UFC. So it's kind of hard to say, man. I honestly, I kind of like Motta here, but I don't really like the odds. Don't really want to take a guy who's as unproven as Motta is, despite looking as good as he is, against a very seasoned vet in Miller at, pretty decent juice. I'd take Motta, at around like pick him, maybe a slight favorite, but at minus 160, minus 170, it's starting to get a little out of hand. Not sure if I'll play Miller either. If I do play Miller, it'll likely be by, round 1 or just round 1 submission. So the official pick for me is just going to be Motta. I think that, I think he should survive that first round, but I might still just sprinkle a little bit on a Miller to win in round 1 if the odds are good enough, because I think that's his best path to victory. As for Motta, he could potentially get the finish, second, third round, but Jim Miller's pretty damn tough, so, he could just win a decision here. So I'm going to go with Motta as the official pick, but, betting-wise, I'm probably just going to take Miller in round 1. And in the next fight, we have a heavyweight bout between Alan Baudot and Parker Porter. Porter's the minus 255 favorite, come back on. Baudot is plus 210, and this should be a pretty interesting fight. This is a lower level heavyweight fight, and Porter, he is on a nice little win streak right now, definitely overperforming a bit. But as far as what he brings to the table, Porter is definitely just a grinder in there. He is someone who likes to move forward and throw volume. He's got good combination punching. He's got some, pretty heavy leg kicks that he likes to throw as well. He is someone who will fight in the clinch as well. He's just someone who likes to bring the fight to his opponents and just really push a pace on them. His cardio seems very good. His output seems solid as well. He does fatigue a bit in fights, but he does a really good job of fighting through it. And, overall, I do think Porter is a pretty fun fighter to watch. He does bring the action. His opponent, Baudot, honestly, the guy is round 1 or bust, I think. He seems to have decent kickboxing for a heavyweight. Does move moderately well in there. Decent movement, side-to-side movement, decent footwork. Overall, he does seem to have pretty good offensive striking and does seem to have some power as well. But the thing with Baudot is he's a quitter, essentially. And, if things aren't going his way, he's going to just crumble in there and look for a way out. He's definitely a front runner, in my opinion. He's going to look to bully his opponents early, but if he isn't able to get them out of there, he will start to slow down. I think he starts to gas out and then eventually just look for a way out. I mean, there's no other way to put it. And, he could very well get Porter out of there early because Baudot, I do think, has got some power. I do think that Baudot is the more natural heavyweight in there. Maybe the better athlete. And Porter is someone who's been knocked out before early in fights. So, I do think there's a chance that we see Baudot potentially get that first round knockout. But, if that doesn't materialize, I do think that Porter is going to be able to start turning it up in the second and third round. Maybe even in that first round, right? If Baudot isn't able to get Porter out of there, maybe in the first 3 or 4 minutes or even less, we see Porter maybe start to turn the tides on him even late in that first round. So I think that if Baudot isn't able to get Porter out of there early, though, I think we see Porter take over later in the fight. Honestly, I think the way to play this fight is really just to take Baudot maybe in round 1, or just to take Porter inside the distance, or Porter round 2 or round 3, because I do feel that once Baudot throws his best shots in that first round and isn't able to get Porter out of there, I do think he's gonna wilt in there. So I like Porter to win in round 2 or round 3. I mean, there is a chance that maybe Porter just decides to grind out Baudot for the remaining 2 or 3 rounds, but I do feel that if Porter decides to really pick it up and put his foot on the gas, I do think he can get Baudot out of there. So pretty straightforward breakdown here. In summation, Baudot is someone who will fade, whereas Porter is someone who will build into the fight and pick up the intensity. So I like Porter here to survive that first round and just put it on Baudot in that second or third round. And in the co-main event, we have Daukaus versus Jamie Pickett, and Daukaus is the minus 220 favorite. Come back on Pickett is plus 185, and I believe Pickett is coming in short notice this fight. He's going to be replacing Julian Marquez, actually. So, coming in short notice this fight, and I do think he's going to have a pretty tough task ahead of him, because Daukaus, I think, is a pretty well-rounded fighter. He's got pretty good boxing when he does let his hands go. But outside of that, he does have pretty solid clinch work as well. Very nice knees and elbows in the clinch. And he does look like he's a pretty solid grappler as well. He's got a very slippery ground game as well. He's kind of hard to hold down there. He's very good at just working when on the ground. I think he can push a decent pace there, as we've seen in the Allen fight. The cardio, I think, is overall solid. I know he did gas pretty hard in the Haas fight, but I think that might be a slight anomaly performance. Haas, for one, is a very strong wrestler in there, so Daukaus might have been pushing a little harder than he had expected to. And outside of that, I believe he did have COVID before. I said he was asymptomatic, but I think it might have played a factor in his cardio not looking great, because he gassed pretty hard after that first round, but because he showed in the Allen fight he could push a pretty hard grappling pace. So, I think there's a bit of discrepancy there. But right now I'm going to lean on it being maybe not as bad as it looked in the Haas fight in general. But overall, I think that Daukaus has got a pretty solid skill set. Personally, I'm probably a little higher on Daukaus than most people, but maybe that's just me. But overall, I do think he's a pretty solid fighter. Just has yet to have that, breakout performance. And he's honestly just had some very weird fights and matchmaking. Honestly, like he makes his debut against Allen, which is, that's a tough debut, honestly. And then, he does work against Stoltzfus. And then, of course, he has the Haas fight, which, was a little weird performance as well. And then, of course, he gets the weird headbutt against Kevin Holland as well. So, he hasn't really had a fight where he could really show off his full skill set. And, I do think that this is a fight for him to do it in against Pickett because, Pickett, I think, is someone who's not that good of a fighter, honestly. And he's definitely got a lot of physical tools. He's very big for the division, very muscled up. But I have a feeling that it doesn't really translate all that well because, for someone as big and strong as he is, he gets backed up a lot, doesn't seem to have a ton of power either. And, he's someone who gets bullied a bit in the clinch as well. Someone like Staropoli was able to do it against him. Staropoli is a welterweight. And, even in his win against Holmes, it was a very ugly performance. Both guys looked pretty sloppy in there. Both guys, slowed down pretty significantly as well. So, man, I just don't think that Pickett is a very good fighter. I struggled to really see his path to victory here. I think that Daukaus is the more well-rounded fighter. I think he's just a little better everywhere, honestly. The striking I could see be pretty even. Daukaus isn't exactly a output machine on the feet, but I do think it's competitive and it could get dicey if it's 100% a stand-up affair. But Pickett is someone who just gets backed up a lot and is someone who doesn't throw either, so it could be pretty close. But I do give Daukaus a pretty big advantage in terms of the wrestling, or not the wrestling, but the grappling. I think he's the much better submission grappler, and I do think that Daukaus can have a lot of success in the clinch as well. Because if someone like Staropoli was able to hold Pickett against the cage for extended periods and just work him there, I think someone like Daukaus could do it. I think Daukaus could possibly hit some takedowns along the cage as well. And with Pickett, I think Pickett's low-key got pretty bad cardio also, which I think kind of explains why his output is so low. But, you look at some of his performances, especially in, like, the Holmes fight where, he's toughing and puffing in there after that first round. In the Staropoli fight where, very grueling sort of fight and very low output, but very just a very sloppy fight in general. The guy's optics in terms of how his posture and everything looks is very bad. And then you look at the Punahele Soriano fight as well. Soriano was able to go the distance against Pickett and was able to consistently hit takedowns and just grind him out. And Punahele Soriano is not someone with great cardio either, and he was able to beat him in a decision. So I think Pickett's low-key got pretty bad cardio, and I think in this matchup, Daukaus is going to be able to outwork Pickett and possibly get the submission in this fight, especially if he's attacking the grappling early, and especially if he's able to get the fight to the ground, because Pickett hasn't really fought anyone with good submission skills, or he really hasn't fought anyone with half decent grappling either. So I think that if this fight does hit the ground, I think we eventually see Daukaus be able to break Pickett in there. So I'm going to go with Kyle Daukaus here. I actually like him quite a bit in this matchup. There are a couple concerns on the Daukaus side. One, I mentioned it before, is going to be the output. He's not exactly a high output, when it comes to the striking, but neither is Pickett. And two, potentially the cardio, which, it's really the Haas fight that's, giving me a little bit of pause, but I'm leaning on it being a bit of an anomaly. And outside of that, I don't think Pickett's got great cardio either. So the concerns that I have for Daukaus, definitely are there, but, being matched up against Pickett, I think that, I think Pickett's just worse in both of those areas. So I like Daukaus here. I'm going to pick him to win via submission, round 2. And in the main event, we have Jamahal Hill versus Johnny Walker, and Hill's the minus 250 favorite. Comeback on Walker is plus 210, and we did get a last minute change up here. This is getting moved from being the co-main to the main event. It's going to be 5 rounds, so I do think it changes the dynamic a little bit, but I do think it still should be a pretty fun fight. It should be a striking affair between two pretty dynamic strikers in Walker and Hill, as long as Walker doesn't try to just look to point fight and just stay on the outside and kick again. But Hill, is probably going to bring the fight to him. Hill is a very dynamic striker himself. He's got very quick hands, very good combination striking in there. He's doesn't seem to have like crazy one-punch power or anything, but he does have pretty good timing and accuracy combined with his quick hands. I think is a pretty dangerous combination there. I think he's got a decent kicking game as well. Does seem to have a pretty dangerous and sneaky knee up the middle. On top of that, Hill's got pretty crazy finishing instinct also. He will go for it when he senses blood in there. And overall has shown, I guess, decent cardio, but he's really only been to decision once, and that last round he was slowing down a bit. So, I do think that is going to be a bit of concern going into this fight. He's never been in a 5-rounder in the UFC. I mean, he's barely gone 3 rounds in the UFC. So that's a big red flag for me in this matchup. Walker, on the other hand, he's gone 5 rounds, but, it was a very low pace sort of fight. Regardless, he does have that 5-round experience with against a very, dangerous striker in Santos. So, this is a very weird matchup, especially since we don't really know quite what to expect from Walker at this stage in his career. Walker used to be someone who would just come out, guns blazing, throw really wild spinning attacks, jump knees, spinning elbows, back fists, overall just really low percentage moves that have been able to connect. But lately, it looks like he's kind of taken a more point fighting approach since, joining SBG. Walker has always been someone who's, got a lot of movement on the feet, lots of feints and stuff. But since his time at SBG, it looks like he's toned it down a lot more, look to just stay on the outside, look to get the kicking game going. But I don't know if that's super effective. We've only seen one fight sample of it, but, he did not look like he was a very effective point striker. But I guess I'll play devil's advocate here a little bit. One, that was his first main event. And two, he was up against Santos, who is a very experienced fighter, a guy with, very big knockout power as well. And on top of that, Walker, I believe, was only in his first or second camp with SBG. It's probably his first time, implementing an extended, point fighting style. So, still overall kind of a green matchup for Walker in that fight. There are some parallels in this fight. Hill is a very dangerous striker himself, but Hill is not as experienced. And if you look at the guys that Hill's beaten, he hasn't really fought any good strikers. Not to say that Walker's a fantastic striker himself, but if you look at the guys Hill's beaten, the best striker he's fought is probably OSP, and that was the shell of OSP in there. So overall, I'd say a pretty weak resume in terms of the strikers he's gone up against in the division so far. I mean, you look at the guys he's able to style on, Jimmy Crute, Paul Craig, who he lost to, and Klitzen Abreu, Darko Stosic, all guys who are, wrestler, grappler types with not much striking in their arsenal. Whereas with Walker, he is a through and through striker and has had a lot more experience there. And say what you will about Walker, but I do think that he still is, pretty dangerous early in the fight if he chooses to be. And, with this new point fighting style, it may not have looked great against Santos in his last fight, but it could potentially give Hill some issues here, because I don't think Hill's, really fought that against that style before. And Walker is, a pretty good athlete in there. He's going to have the height and reach advantage. So maybe this outside point fighting style may work for Walker in this situation. But overall, this is a really tough and weird fight for me to call, just because there's so many variables around it. A lot of it's on the Walker side, actually. And the fact that, this is going to be a 5-rounder now, I think changes it up a little bit also. But back to Walker, I mean, the variables, I'm talking about here is we just don't really know what to expect from Walker coming into this. Is he gonna look to start aggressively, look to just throw wild spinning attacks, or if he's gonna look to be a little more reserved like he has in his most recent fight, and just look to stay on the outside, really just look to pick at his opponents. And then of course there's going to be the chin issue of Walker. I think he's got some durability issues. He's been knocked out before. He has been hurt and wobbled. So, again, someone like Hill who's got a very sharp striking in there, it could be a quick night for Walker. And on top of that, Walker just doesn't seem to have a very defined process in his game yet. He's got a few meme finishes early in his UFC career, but I just don't know how replicatable that is. And he hasn't shown that he's a great minute winner, should fights get extended. So, Johnny Walker, I think, is a very unreliable fighter. But on the other hand, we have Hill. While he does seem to have very good, sharp, crisp boxing, is still somewhat unproven. I feel overall he's had some pretty soft matchups. And, this being a 5-rounder is going to be a bit of a factor as well. So, there's no way I could really recommend betting Hill at like minus 250. Maybe if you like him, just take him by knockout, because I think that with the way Walker fights, he could potentially get clipped here. But if he doesn't, and this fight does get extended, it could get interesting. I honestly don't know how it's going to look if, this fight gets into the third, fourth, or even fifth round. How either guy's going to fare. But as far as a pair pick goes, I think I'm just going to go with Hill here. I think he's a little more reliable. Walker's just a big question mark for me at this point. And, the chin's definitely not helping either. So I'm going to go with Hill. I think he gets the round 2 knockout. I think he can get it done early.